Thanks for joining, folks. This is week 4 of our generational wealth building webinar series. We're going to focus this evening exclusively on investing in mortgage notes. This is a hidden gem of real estate investing. Not many folks, even experienced folks, know the ins and outs of investing in mortgage notes. Some folks, myself included, I didn't even know this was an investment vehicle before. This was new to me. And so Emily and I have been investing in mortgage notes for a little while now, and it's quickly become a favorite of ours. So we're gonna learn all about that this evening. Just as a quick reminder, I'm not here to sell anything, not going to be asking for money after the presentation. This is purely educational in nature. And so I hope everybody gets a lot out of it. We've been through 3 webinars so far. We've learned a little bit about multifamily industrial investing. We're going to talk mortgage notes tonight. And then next week, we're going to wrap up with a strategy that I like to use to create a plan. If real estate investing is in your financial future, we can use this strategy to lay out a plan on paper so that you know exactly what you've got to go do and how to do it, and what the numbers can look like for you as far as your personal finances go. So Emily and I, we've been investing in real estate for about 10 years. We both come from manufacturing operations and engineering backgrounds, predominantly worked most of our careers in the General Electric Corporation. Emily's been doing full-time real estate now since 2013, and then I joined her shortly after we switched into multifamily in 2017. We've got a pretty sizable real estate portfolio. We focus predominantly multifamily real estate, but we do have some adjacencies in other vehicles, industrial, commercial, as well as mortgage notes, which we're going to talk a lot about tonight. And again, real estate investing takes on many forms. You don't have to focus on just one type. You can really diversify across the landscape of real estate. There's plenty to keep you interested and busy. But tonight is solely dedicated on mortgage notes. And we're going to learn just the fundamentals about what a note is, how it's structured, how people make money investing in them. And I've put the word passively on here because by their nature, note investing is predominantly a passive activity, right? There's really not a whole lot that goes into it from a due diligence standpoint. There's obviously some research and some market study and things like that. But I'm going to approach it from the passive aspect. Let's go. Let's learn about notes. So the basics of notes. If you've owned a home, chances are you may have had a mortgage. You may have had a mortgage note, and you were probably on the borrowing side of that arrangement where you went to buy a single family residence. You went to a bank or a lender, and they checked your credit, they checked your income, and they let you borrow, sometimes 80, 90% of the home's value in the form of a loan. And so you've potentially been on the borrowing side of that relationship before. But note investing is where you turn the tables. You go to the other side and you are actually the lender. You become the bank. And then you're letting somebody borrow your investment funds. So that is exactly, from the highest level, that's exactly what this is. As a note investor, you are becoming the bank. And so as we start to kind of peel the onion back, what is the investment itself and how is it structured? So, if becoming the bank is the 40,000 foot level, well, then the 35,000 foot level is, the investment. What is it? It's you are investing in a monthly income stream. That's what you're investing in. You're not necessarily, the opposite side of the spectrum would be if you were to buy a single family house and watch it appreciate over time That would be kind of the opposite, right? Where you buy for appreciation. This type of investment, you're purely investing for monthly cash flow, dependable monthly cash flow. And I put that picture of the clock up there because that's what it is. It's clockwork, right? It comes on the same day every month. And the structure of the note, and again, if you've been a borrower in this arrangement, you probably already know this, but the structure of the note and the terms are the amount of the loan amount, at a certain interest rate for a certain term, which equals, when you do the math, a monthly payment, a principal and interest payment. And the note, the agreement between you, the bank, and the homeowner, the borrower, the agreement is securitized by a piece of real estate. We use the term collateral. It's a security instrument, right? The borrower is borrowing your money with the promise to pay it back and then putting the house up as collateral if they fail to pay it back. So again, many of us may have been on the borrowing side of this equation, but tonight we're going to talk about being on the lender side. Why do Emily and I like mortgage note investing? And really, when I boiled it down to the three things, if I were to pick the three things that I feel the strongest about when it comes to this investment vehicle within the real estate landscape, it's, you know what? Just realized I'm not sharing my screen. Let me do that. Don't worry, guys. You haven't missed much. Here we go. Okay. So what are the three things, the high level three things that Emily and I like about mortgage notes? And they are asset diversification and the freedom to pick location. Okay. Usually when you're investing in real estate, you don't have to, it's not a requirement, but it helps to invest, in places that you're familiar with. Maybe it's your own backyard, right? But with mortgage notes, you can invest all over the country, right? You tend to stay in places that are, foreclosure friendly, okay, lender friendly, bank friendly from a legislation and foreclosure perspective, just to mitigate any sort of risk. But you can invest anywhere. People originate loans in every state of the country. And it really gives you a variety to look at from a location standpoint. Predictability from a financial standpoint, it's just extremely predictable. There's just, I've been a landlord. I've been a single family landlord. I own multifamily apartment communities now. So I'm an owner of real estate, right? I have tenants. I have people paying rent. And then I've also now been a lender. I've been the bank. And there's just something different about someone who owns a home, right? When they have equity in the home, when they have a down payment and they own that piece of real estate, the payments just come in more likely than not. And so it creates a very predictable environment. And for that reason, and the fact that we are buying into a first position lien on the piece of real estate associated with the note, these investments tend to be a lot lower risk than actually owning the real estate, right? And I say that most of my portfolio is owned real estate, right? 60+% of my investment portfolio is owned real estate. And we're continually adding mortgage notes to our portfolio. But I recognize that as the bank, I am in the position of least risk. If something happens to the economy and the homeowner loses their job, well, I'm the bank. I'm still owed the payment. If the property taxes go up, that's not my problem. That's the homeowner's problem. If the insurance goes up, that's the homeowner's problem. That's not my problem, the bank, right? And so really, with a predictable investment that has a certain term and a certain interest rate and a monthly payment, you find yourself in the position of least risk as the bank. And so what does this really boil down to? Well, it boils down to making a single investment. So you invest once in the note and you get cash flow for a certain period of time, long-term cash flow for a number of years. And my note portfolio has notes in it as long as 15 years, and it's got notes in as short or as long as 3 years. So there's a variety, right? There's a variety of investments you can make based on what your criteria is. But as we start to peel the onion back, you're really just buying into a cash flow stream. So I've got 2 or 3 real life examples to go over. But let's start with this one. A home in Anywhere, USA. Actually, I believe this house is actually really in Savannah, Georgia. And it is worth $130,000. Okay. An important piece of information, the home's value. And that's not me creating that, right? That's not me making that up or guessing at the home's value. That's actually a broker, a real estate agent or broker going out to the local area and me paying that person to do a market analysis and telling me what the home's worth. So this home's worth $130,000. And the homeowner, the borrower, has a mortgage, a note for 42% of that value for $54,000 balance. So the mortgage has a $54,000 balance on this $130,000 home. So the homeowner has what? Has a decent amount of equity in the home, right? More than 50%. And this specific note carries an interest rate of 8.5%, and it's alive for the next 12.5 years. So the borrower has 12.5 years left paying down this mortgage. That all boils down to a payment of $585 every month. And so that, just to go through the numbers, that's what this note is. It's got a balance of $54,000 at a note rate of 8.5% and a payment of $585 for the next 12.5 years. Now, this is a note investment, right? So it's for sale, or it was for sale as an investment. And the lender, the bank or the person, the investor, whoever had the note before me, puts it up for sale, says, all right, I've owned this long enough. I've made my interest, my yield. I'm happy. It's time to sell. Well, notes generally don't sell at face value. Okay. This $54,000 balance, the quote unquote asset value that you're buying, is going to be sold at a discount. And this specific note is actually was sold at $8,000 discount. So instead of paying $54,000 for the note, the balance of the remaining term, you, the investor, would pay $46,000. Okay. Now the question always comes up. Well, okay, well, why possibly, or how could the bank take a haircut on this asset if it's worth $54,000, and it truly is? Because if the homeowner decides tomorrow to sell the house or refinance and pay off the loan, well, then the lender is going to receive $54,000. That's the balance on the loan. So why would anybody be willing to take a haircut or a discount on that? And it's purely a balance sheet play, right? Banks do it all the time, right? They buy and sell mortgages all the time. If you've had a mortgage as a borrower, you probably have seen that. And so the street value as an investor is not the balance of the note. It's always going to be less. And in this case, it was $46,000 for this note. And what does that look like? Well, it's $585 every month for the next 12.5 years. If you do the math, you'll find that that's just about $88,000 back to you, the investor, for the $46,000 investment. Pretty simple, right? And you can do this if you've got a financial calculator. Go to Google, type in mortgage calculator, loan calculator. You can do all this math, right? Plug in the loan balance, the rate, how much term is left, the 12.5 years, and you'll find out what the payment is. If you happen to know as the investor what the discounted price is, in this case, $46,000, then you can calculate more things like how much return on investment, how much yield, what cash flow you'll make, things like that. And we'll go through that in just a second. But at this point, we've just kind of identified, hey, the mortgage note, it's in existence. It was originated. If this was a 30-year loan, then this was originated, 20 plus years ago. And this lender has chosen to sell the last 12.5 years of the note for an $8,000 discount. Pretty cool. We're going to I'll touch on risk a little bit here throughout the presentation. But probably the biggest risk mitigation in mortgage note investing, aside from the obvious, which would be, the borrower, the strength of the borrower, on-time payments, how long have they made on-time payments, things of that nature. But beyond some of the obvious items, really from an investment perspective, the biggest mitigation of risk that I see is how much I'm buying the note for. What's the investment for me? In this example, it was $46,000 versus what is the property worth? In this example, $130,000. And why is that important? Because if the borrower has an issue or something happens, right? Life gets in the way and they default on the loan. Well, then there is that much cushion between my investment, $46,000, and the home's value for quote unquote things to go wrong, right? And I want to make sure if for some reason we can't work things out, if we can't get the borrower back on track, if we can't do a loan modification, what have you, if we do have to foreclose, well, then I want to make sure that this home is worth a lot more than what I've invested. Again, we don't know, right? You don't meet the borrower. You don't know who they are. I mean, they could trash the house, things could happen. But if you've got a good amount of cushion between what you've paid and what the property's worth, if you did have to go down the foreclosure route, you mitigate a lot of risk if you have a lot of cushion in there, right? If this property were to go to auction and sell for 130, well, then you're going to get your investment back at least, right? So that's very important. I see some folks who've been in the business a long, long time, they maybe have a different risk profile. They're willing to get a little bit less margin here on this buffer, this cushion, and that's fine. They've been doing it for a while. For me, I generally like to see my investment, again, the $46,000 in this example, I like to see that investment be 60% or less than the property's value. So in other words, if the property's worth 100,000, I'd like to buy the note at 60,000 or less. Okay. That's just a personal limit at this point. But this happens to be one of the bigger ways to mitigate risk. So let's take a quick time out. I'll field a question or two if we have any. But I'd like to say at this point, after I had learned this, aspect of note investing, the fact that you can get discounts, the fact that it's dependable payment, first position lien, the fact that people do this in the first place, I was totally blown away. And the light bulb started going off. Like, wow, okay. So I don't have to own the home to be the landlord and make the rent payment. I can be the bank. And, I don't have to, if the air conditioner breaks, I don't have to fix that. I don't have to maintain the property. That's the homeowner's job. Things like that, just all sorts of things start popping in your head. So, any questions on the numbers so far? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a couple more examples just to hammer home some of the points and to just give you a feel for what's, really out there from an investment perspective. These examples here are a couple from my own portfolio. Actually, this one is not. This is a colleague of mine who did this deal, but it's a good one. And so let's go through it. But yeah, I have a couple examples here. We'll just roll through some numbers. You can see kind of what's out there from an investment perspective and what the note investing landscape looks like. So again, the pertinent details, right? Things that are important to us as the bank, as the note investor. This is a home in a nice little suburb of St. Louis. And it's worth $340,000, right? And again, that's not me coming up with that number. That's like a professional real estate agent broker coming up with that number. So 340 grand on this home. And the balance of the note, the legal balance, is 174,702. So again, there's that buffer, right? The balance on the loan versus the home's value, or actually the price. So the investment price, 168,000. You can see there's the discount that this note sale has versus the balance. So again, here's the balance. This is what the borrower sees. When the borrower gets their statement, the homeowner borrower says, oh, I've got a balance of 174,000 left to pay on this mortgage. Me, the investor, when this is thrown up for sale, I have the opportunity to buy this asset for 168,000. So there's my discount. The investment comes with a monthly payment of just about $1,669 a month. And it's got, again, this one is the same as the last one, 12 and a half years roughly left to pay down on the term. And so we've got a couple parameters here, a couple calculations. We've got cash flow, we've got yield. And I'm gonna dive into this deeper, probably about 3 slides from now. But it's 2 very important parameters that I look at when trying to sift through what note investment I want to make. It has a lot to do with principal payback and a lot to do with how much, return on investment you'll make. But essentially, cash flow is a parameter that we calculate annually, annual cash flow based on payments coming to you, the bank, principal and interest, the 1669 number. And then yield, of course, we know that mortgage payments are principal and interest. Principal being this 168,000 that you threw into the deal. So as we recognize that some of these payments coming back to us include your original investment, right? Yield accounts for just the interest portion of that. Okay. So if you were to let this investment sit forever and just pay you, this would be your interest income. And then, like I said, I've got a couple math equations I'll throw up on the screen here in a little bit, just to hammer that home. But again, what is the investment vehicle? You're paying for an income stream. And in this example, you're paying $168,000 for $1,669 a month for 12.6 years. All right, this happens to be a note that's in my portfolio. So this is a home, nice neighborhood down in and around Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And this note was a $75,000 investment. So let's take a look. The home's value, high-priced real estate in South Florida, $630,000. The note I bought for 75, and the balance, which I don't believe I put on this slide, but the balance was just north of 85,000. So it came with a little bit more than a $10,000 discount. And the monthly payment, $1,600 a month. So, on the surface, what is this? This is a lender or a bank or an investor saying, okay, I've owned this note long enough, ready to recapitalize, ready to, get some money back and originate another mortgage or do something. And so this was a note that was sunsetting in its final, couple years. Might have been a 30-year note. I can't remember. But it only had like 4 or 5 years left. And so I bought it. And, reason being was I really liked the cash flow. I liked the fact that I could pay $75,000 and make $1,600 a month. There's no real estate investment that I've done that has that cash flows that well. Okay. Now, recognize that the $1,600 a month is a portion of that is my principal coming back to me, right? My $75,000, and the other portion's interest. So there is the yield and cash flow calculations again. Okay. And there's the term left, 4.5 years. So like I said, this mortgage was basically sunsetting. It's only got a handful of years left, right? And so again, in my mind, as an investor, I am investing 75 grand to make 1,600 a month for the next 4.5 years. Okay. What I do with that 1,600 a month is, it's up to me. It's up to the investor, right? In my case, I reinvest a lot of that cash. Okay. And you can have different strategies, but at the bottom line is you're investing in a cash flow stream. And because this loan was kind of maturing, nearing the end, the cash flow is very high, right? The amount of cash flow you get monthly versus what you invested is very high. Okay. Look through one more. This is also a note in my portfolio. This is actually a deal that I partnered with an investor on, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But there is partnering that occurs in note investing, and so that's pretty cool too, right? Because you can create kind of a little marketplace of investors and people going out doing note investments, and so this is a pretty neat one, actually. It was a $50,000 investment. The home's value, of course, we look at first, 355 grand. So healthy home value, and $50,000 investment for the note. Again, this was one that was, in the final, we'll call it the final third of its life, so to speak. And so it had 98 payments left. And so 50,000 investment buys you $700 a month payment there. And so we do our cash flow and yield calculations. Again, the cash flow is the percentage of cash coming back at you, the bank. And this is an annual number, 17%. So if I take this $699 and I multiply it by 12 and I divide that by how much I invested, that's where I'm getting that 17%. Okay. And then if you remove the principal payback and consider just the interest income, then your yield is 8% on this specific investment. And so there it is, right? 50,000 buys you $699 a month in cash flow for 8 years. And a lot of folks will ask, well, okay, well, what happens if the borrower sells the home or refinances? Well, as a first position lien holder, right, you're the first person that the title company is going to pay at a capital event, whether that's a sale or a refinance. So, and I can't quite remember the exact figures here, what the note discount was, but let's just say the note discount was 10 grand. Let's say the balance was 60,000 and I bought it for 50. Well, the minute that the homeowner sells, I get to recoup that discount, right? Because the homeowner is going to pay the 60 number to pay off the loan, and I only paid 50 to get into the investment. So just another kind of side benefit. I never really consider it too heavily when I'm making these investments, because there's no guarantee the homeowner's going to sell a home or refinance, right? But it is kind of an added side benefit. You make some quick cash when they pay the loan off. So let's just review this real quick, because I don't want to leave this stone unturned necessarily. Just to be really clear about the two parameters when I'm looking at a mortgage note investment, after I've determined that my due diligence is solid, the borrower's making on-time payments, it's in a market that I like, it's not in a state that's impossible to foreclose in, that kind of thing. I look at cash flow and yield, right? And yield is really the pure interest income, the interest profit right? If I were to buy this note and forget about it forever and just let it sit there, well, then that is the profit. The yield is the profit I would make over the X years that I own, that I have that note. Cash flow is interesting. And it's almost, to me, I mean, to me, the active investor, to me, it's almost as important, maybe even a little bit more important than yield in some regard, because cash flow tells me how much total money is coming back to me every month, including my original principal investment, right? But as we'll learn here in a second, I do like to invest in these notes that pay back quickly, that pay high cash flow, right? Where the P&I, the principal and interest payment, is high versus my investment, because it means I can reinvest those funds quicker. Okay. And just to kind of be clear on the math, the cash flow is the monthly P&I payment times 12. So a full year of payments divided by what you paid for the investment. So in the last example, $699 times 12 divided by my investment, $50,000. It's a simple, if you want to call it return on investment, that's fair, right? Cash flow return on investment. To touch a little bit about how we do it, and I hinted it on this just in the prior slide. In our portfolio, and we've been doing mortgage notes now a little bit, longer than a year and a half. So it's not, it's I'll call it new for us still, right? We're still really coming up the learning curve, but what we've experienced in that time frame is really eye-opening in the strategy that you can carry on mortgage notes. And it's concerning the way that you can reinvest your funds. Now, I spoke to one of our investors, one of our multifamily investors, and when I presented this to her and we talked about options and how to get into mortgage notes, I talked about the reinvestment strategy, and she said, "Adam, I'm just going to spend it." and she's in that phase of her life, right? She spends money, and she says, if I'm going to have an annual budget on X, Y, and Z, spending my money on what I like to do, travel, leisure, whatever it is, well, then I'd like to be invested in something that's at least returning a yield so that I can, make money on the money while it sits there. Well, for Emily and I, we're in a different phase of life than she is, but we take these P&I payments and we continually reinvest them. Okay. And that's not to say that I receive a $700 payment this month and then I turn around and reinvest that in a new mortgage note. Not exactly. But as it starts to build up and I start to get enough funds from these monthly payments to go do another mortgage note deal, that's what I do. And what that effectively does is it's taking your original investment. So in that last example, my $50,000, and it's amplifying the returns on that original investment. Okay. You're essentially taking the original investment, which is cash flowing now and has been cash flowing and continues to cash flow. You're taking that principal return to you and potentially the interest, if you take it all, throwing it into another note investment and now earning a yield on that. And so, that is a form of compounding yield when you continually reinvest the proceeds coming back to you from these mortgage note investments. And, come to find out, even though we were doing that in practice, it's an actual real thing when you're a bank. Like, the banks do this all the time, and it's how they make so much money. There's an official term for it. It's called a banker's spread, where they take a depositor's money, right? They'll loan it out, they'll create interest, right? And then they'll take the returns, right? They'll take the money coming back into the bank and they'll reinvest it, or they'll reloan it out, okay, to another borrower. And so it's super powerful. It's just really, really powerful. And it's enabled us to take 7% yields, 8% yields, compound that up to 14, 15, 16% yields with the same money. So, you could call it a complex phenomenon or a complex theory. You need to get out a spreadsheet to prove it to yourself, but it really is cool. And that's how we do it, right? We don't necessarily spend it. We do a lot of reinvesting with that money coming in from these mortgage notes. All right. I talked about partnerships. And a lot of our multifamily investors, we've had the privilege, it's very humbling. Over the past 6-7 years, we've worked with hundreds of, close friends, family, past coworkers, folks who've gotten into the real estate industry. And we've worked with those folks as investors, and they've helped us, they've partnered with us in buying multifamily real estate. And so I have a lot of those folks ask me, hey, what are you up to today? Because as we talked about during the last presentation, multifamily real estate, the market's, it's not exactly a buyer's market right now. And so when we talk about mortgage notes, and like what Emily and I are doing today with mortgage notes, the conversation naturally goes like, oh, well, that's cool. How do I get into that? Because, the cash flow is good and it's predictable and it's a safe investment. And so what we've been doing, this is pretty neat. And again, the things that you don't know until you learn them is just phenomenal. The way that folks partner on these investment vehicles is through partial note investments. And let me talk about that for a minute. Instead of me and Joe Smith investor going out and each putting $50,000 down to buy a $100,000 note, and splitting the title of the note and splitting, where the payments go and all that. What we do, which is common across the industry, we didn't invent this. A lot of people do this, is Emily and I, the active investor, we go out, we find the notes, we sift through the due diligence, we make sure we're buying good notes. We go out and buy the entire note. Okay. From womb to tomb. So if there's 12 years left on the note, or in this, example here, 12 and a half years, I'll buy that entire term. And say my investor would like to invest, $60,000 for 8.5 years. Well, then, if I find a right note that makes sense and has a good yield and acceptable return on investment for the investor, then I'm able to sell the first, in this example, 8.5 years of that note. Everything goes to that investor, all the payments, the assignment of the note, the recording of who owns the note, everything goes to that investor for the period of 8.5 years. And they get all that cash flow for 8.5 years. They make their return on investment, they make their yield, right? And then after that period of time is over, the note assignment, the payments, everything associated with the note reverts back to me, the original, the whole note owner, the original note owner. Okay. We call this partial note investing, and it's very common. It's very cool. Actually, it's how my father got into it recently. We sold him a portion of our notes. We said, okay, well, how much do you have to invest? Oh, okay. And, I'll sell you 5 years of this note and 7 years of this note. And here's the investment amount and the payments and all that. So it's pretty cool. It allows, I called it a partnership earlier, and it truly is, because it allows Emily and I, the active investor, to go out and find the notes, right? We're plugged in, we're networked in, and we're able to find these investments. And then for the passive investor who wants to sit back and just collect mailbox money, it's a good way to get in the business and to invest in these notes. And for that reason, it's a partnership. If things go wrong with the borrower, Emily and I go out and handle that, and things like that. So yeah, so there's partnerships available. It's pretty cool. Well, everybody always wants to know what happens when they stop paying. What happens if the homeowner stops paying? Well, no one on this call would ever do that as a borrower, right? We all make our mortgage payments on time every time. In the case of that last example, right, where we have the home that's worth $355,000, and we invested 50,000, we get a first position lien on the property, right? If the home is sold, whether it's, to a traditional home buyer, or if it's sold at auction at the county courthouse, when the title company pulls the title report, your name is going to show up as first position lien. And so, generally speaking, you're always, your first move is, the low cost, low time, easy effort move. It's okay. Well, can we work this out? Everybody runs, life happens. Things happens to everybody, right? We've all had issues happen in life. And, how can we make this work? Do we need to restructure the debt? Do we need to restructure the payment? Do we need to give them a couple months to catch up? What does that look like, right? Borrowers that don't go dark and work with you are great, right? So you try to work it out first and foremost. At, last resort, you've got the foreclosure process. Again, if you're investing in places where foreclosure is pretty easy, Texas is a good example of that. It's not that difficult. It can happen in a matter of 30 to 60 days. It's not that difficult to go through the process. And if you're smart about your investments, where, like in this example, I invested 50,000 and it's securitized by, a house that's, 355,000. Well, then, there's a lot of room for things to happen between those numbers. And if it sells at auction for, well, let's say, it sells in a distressed state at auction for 200. Well, then you're definitely going to get your investment back. Here's just a quick snapshot of where we own the towns, the states that we own our mortgage notes in, our portfolio. And so you can see, I'd say naturally, we're definitely still in the Sun Belt. Again, we try to target places that are very, very foreclosure friendly in case you have to go through that. Let's talk a little bit about, I touched earlier about, being a landlord, owning rentals. I've definitely owned single family rentals in the past, currently own a lot of multifamily real estate. And here's just a quick dive into the math of, hey, do I want to be the landlord or do I want to be the bank? And it's high level. It definitely touches on the key points, but you can see that it tends to be, from a cash flow perspective, a lot better to be the bank. I mean, you're making more money every month. And actually, funny enough, we sold our last single family rent house earlier this year, about 3 months ago. And the numbers on the left are the real numbers from that rent house. And the numbers on the right are also the real numbers, because what I did is I sold the home after the tenant moved out. I sold the home to somebody and I offered the financing. I offered to be the bank. I said, okay, I'm going to sell the home and I will also finance the deal for you, the buyer. And so I'm the bank now. So the person living in the home, the homeowner, is paying me, the bank, and these are real numbers. Actually, in actuality, I negotiated the servicing, so the borrower pays that, and so the borrower is paying my loan servicer. A loan servicer is the person who accepts the payment, separates out the escrows, makes sure property taxes, insurance are paid, things of that nature, and then pays me at the end of the day. And so those are real numbers right there on the screen from that transaction. And again, I don't have to worry about the maintenance, the insurance, the taxes, any of that. It's really, really cool. And so a lot of folks are like, yeah, Adam, but guess what? You're not going to make any of the equity gain through the appreciation in the real estate. And believe me, I owned this home as a landlord for almost 10 years, made plenty of equity, right? It's all good. And there might be some left. There really might be, it's still a great neighborhood and it might still appreciate it. It will still appreciate. But when I look at the math, as the bank holding the asset or holding the note for 5 years, I'm going to make $100,000 in interest as the lender. And it's just going to come to the mailbox, right? The borrower put down a $25,000 down payment. So if the borrower decides, hey, I don't want to pay the mortgage anymore, well, they've got $25,000 of skin in the game. So again, to me, I'm a little miffed that it took me this long to realize it, but being the bank, so much better in that specific scenario and in a lot of scenarios. All right, let's touch briefly about investing in non-performing loans, non-performing notes. So up to this point, we have been focused exclusively on notes and mortgages that pay you, the lender, on time, every time. There's an entirely different class of investments called non-performing notes. You can actually go out and buy loans that are in default. And it is very popular. And people make millions of dollars doing this. So just a quick little chart to show you what the landscape looks like. Foreclosure filings dating back to April 2005. You can see in here the nice little gap in foreclosures due to COVID. But guess what? COVID's over and we're back there. Banks are back to foreclosing on defaulted borrowers. I'm gonna talk through this asset class through an example. And I'll be honest with everybody. I'm pretty risk averse. I don't do a lot of risky investing, and buying a defaulted note that someone's not paying on just sounds like a whole lot of risk to me. But we did our first one earlier this year. And so let me talk about it. This row home in Wilmington, Delaware, worth $110,000, had a defaulted mortgage. The borrower hadn't paid on it in several years. It was a divorce case, but it was a low balance note. The balance was $33,000. Okay. So it's called legal collectible balance because not only is the loan balance in there, but there's all sorts of attorney's fees and late payment fees and accrued interest. And so as the lender, the note owner, I am due $33,000. And that includes the note and the fees and everything. To get into the investment, this note went up for sale. The lender that owned it said, I'm tired of this, or, I'm done. I want it off my books. And I paid $23,000 to get into this investment. So $23,000 to own an asset that's worth $33,000 and it's not performing. So the pre-foreclosure management, the prior owner of the note, did what they could. I can't really comment on what they did, but whether it was communication or hiring attorneys, I'm not really sure. But they owned the note for a period of about 5 months or so before I went in and bought it. So I bought it July of this year, and it cost me $23,000. And here's what we did. And again, I mentioned Emily and I are kind of plugged into a network. We don't do this type of investing alone. Have a lot of mentors, have a lot of people that we work with to help us along the way. And so when I go do something new like this, two things. One, I don't want to spend a lot of money, hence the low balance loan. And two, I ask a lot of questions. I get as much coaching as I can. And the coaching I received was, hey, Adam, you ought to go ask the borrower's attorney, have your attorney ask their attorney if they're willing to settle for less than the loan balance, less than the $33,000. And so we emailed their attorney and said, hey, if you can pay $28,000 in the next 30 days, we're going to put a 30-day limit on it. The deal's on the table for 30 days. If you can wire 28 grand in 30 days, we will wipe the debt free. We will call the note satisfied. So the attorney went over to the borrowers, and sure enough, the divorce attorney, separate guy, said, yep, that, we're trying to get this loan off the books because it's one of the last things in the divorce case. This isn't working out. We need to get it off the books. That sounds great. They're willing to do it. And we did it. About 20 days later, he wired 28 grand into the account. I signed the release of mortgage, sent it to him, paid off. So although this, for some folks, it's like, all right, man, 5 grand. Okay, cool. But this is how people are making a lot of money buying note assets that do not perform, where people are not paying. And, all sorts of questions come up. And I even have questions about this. Like, well, how come the last lender couldn't do it? Why was I successful? I think what you're going to find is it's the same as when you're buying distressed properties, right? If you're buying distressed real estate, it's the same thing. Some investors, some note owners, some banks just don't pay enough attention. They're not paying enough attention to their portfolio. This note could have been one $33,000 note in a multi-million-dollar portfolio of notes, and no one's paying attention to it. So it's just super interesting. And it's not the only way to do it. Another NPL, non-performing loan strategy, are people who actually flip these into performing loans. And this gal that's on the screen is one of our colleagues. She's in our network. What she does is she buys non-performing notes, notes where the borrowers are not paying, and she works with them. She has a way of working with them to get them reperforming, to get them back on their feet, to get them back into a paying position, modifying the loan, finding a way to work it out. And it improves the value of the note asset. So if she bought the non-performing note at a deep discount because it's not performing, she gets it reperforming. That improves the value of the note. It makes it more valuable from an investor perspective. Then she goes and sells it as a performing asset. So there's different ways to do it. Me personally, 90% of my activity is probably going to be in the performing space, just because cash flow is something that Emily and I really enjoy. And all the examples I went through are not the only ones on the table. Here is a list of mortgage notes available for sale. This was a couple months ago, and you can see that there's a whole bunch at various amounts. I mean, I've got one note in my portfolio that is $5,000 balance, right? And I've got another one that's $16,000. So yeah, not every note is going to be like the first example we looked at. That is a $168,000 commitment, right? These investments are obtainable for most any investor who wants to look at them. And again, just kind of returning to why we do it. This is a download from our loan servicer. We use a company called Allied. They collect the payment from the borrower and then send us our portion. And again, these things are just killer cash flow. It's every month. It's very dependable. And you can see in the past 60 days, it's healthy. It's a healthy amount. It allows us to live the life we love to live. And oh, by the way, if you tack in that non-performing profit, not bad, right? Not a bad little payday for doing, compared to being the landlord, compared to going out and buying the real estate, being the owner, being the active real estate investor. This happens to be a relatively passive form of mailbox money, right? I didn't do a whole lot to obtain this $18,000, right? Just the due diligence, understanding the borrower's, background, payment history, make sure it's in a location I like, clean title, and you make the investment. So I think that's why we like it. And I am working on moving more of my portfolio to it. Today it's a small percentage, 20, 30%, but I'm working on moving more of the portfolio in that direction. All right. So we're wrapping up the mortgage note investing webinar. I want to do quick sneak peek. I want to throw one slide up here that's going to do a sneak peek for our fifth and final webinar. We've talked about a couple different ways to invest in real estate over the past 3 or 4 weeks. And in fact, on this slide, everything in green is something that I've got experience in, that my wife, Emily, and I have experience in personally. This is how we look at our overall investing portfolio. We divide it into wealthy, healthy, safe, and dead money based on these rates of return. Okay. And you can see quite clearly that, the wealthy money is the higher rate of return. The dead money is the lower rate of return. It's not, rocket science. But in order to gear ourselves towards the final discussion, which is putting a plan together for investing your portfolio in real estate, in order to get us in the right mindset, this is a great chart. Okay. I'm going to show it again next week, but it really gets us to understanding where wealth is built. It helps us understand that when we diversify, because not every, it may not be ideal or safe to put everything in a 20% per year investment. Okay. But it helps us understand when we do diversify, where are we going? Okay. Where can I get solid returns and modest returns? And, maybe where should I try to avoid? Like, where are the poor returns? Right. So this just happens to be something that I print out, hang it on the wall. And every month when I look at my portfolio, where is it? Where is my money? Where is my wealth? Where does it sit in these buckets? By what percentage? We talked about in this webinar series, we talked specifically about these type of vehicles. And so I'm super excited to build on that, because, when you say, okay, well, here's my options, you go back and you say, well, I want to apply 30% of my portfolio up here and 10% here. Then you can really start to put a plan in place and understand where you want to throw your real estate investing. So like that, we've come to the end of this week's webinar, and it's been super enjoyable. I really enjoyed talking mortgage notes. Next week, like I talked about, we're going to wrap up with a 10-year plan. And I'm going to go through the basic foundational construction of a 10-year plan investing in real estate, where you can go from a current, financial situation today to building massive generational wealth if you look ahead 10 years. And 10 years from now, when you look in the rearview mirror, you'll see, oh gosh, okay, it was the plan. It was the plan that put the action in place. So really looking forward to that. That'll be the next Wednesday, same time, same place. And this is how to get a hold of Emily and I. Any questions on the mortgage note topic? Any discussion there?
Hey, Adam. Quick couple questions.
Hey, Ron.
So legal considerations for partial investments. So your silent investors is the first question. Also, are there any turn rates as far as, how the notes sell, how frequently they sell? And then, so if you're a silent investor, how frequently that might sell? And then also, are there any tax implications?
Yeah, legal considerations. When you say that, you mean like the structure between, say, me and the passive investor and the borrower?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'll start at the borrower and work my way up. So from the borrower's perspective, nothing really changes, right? When I go and buy the note, and this, for all of us who've had mortgages on homes, you may actually experience this as a borrower. When I personally, as the investor, go buy the note and then move the note to my servicing company, the borrower will get a mail piece that says, hey, I am selling your note. It comes from their bank or their lender. I am selling your note to A&E Real Estate Investments, and their new loan servicer is called Allied Corporation. You will be receiving a note from them. My servicer sends a note, says, hey, we are your new loan servicer. Please send us your next payment. So very simple. The borrower gets a couple mail pieces. They know that when the note sells, where to send the payment. The actual vehicle for the note transaction is called an assignment of mortgage. And that is recorded in the county that the home is located in. So if, for example, if Wells Fargo sells me a note, Wells Fargo will draw up paperwork called an assignment of mortgage, and they sign it and I sign it, and then it gets recorded at the county courthouse, wherever the borrower's home is located, thereby officially recording the transaction, so that, like I said earlier, if the title company pulls the title report, in the case of like a home sale, they'll see me as the new note owner. So that's from the borrower's perspective and my perspective. Now, let's say a passive investor gets involved and says, hey, I'd really love to make an investment and want to do, 5 years, and here's how much I have to invest, et cetera, et cetera. What we do is it's very simply the same thing, right? It's an assignment of mortgage, or if you're in a deed of trust state, like Texas is a deed of trust state. We don't do mortgages here. Assignment of deed of trust. And I sign it saying that, hey, I'm the note owner. And then the passive investor signs it saying, hey, I'm buying 5 years worth at, this investment amount and this payment. And then we simply treat the relationship like a loan, where the borrower pays me, the full note owner, and then I have a loan with the passive investor. I pay the passive investor. That makes it nice because it allows me to, in the case of, let's say, a foreclosure, or if something goes south, right? Let's say the borrower stops paying. That gives me the optionality to pay off the passive investor. If there's a loan, a separate loan between me and the passive investor that's assigned by the mortgage or the deed of trust, then I don't have to wait for the borrower's payment to pay them, right? I can either keep paying the passive investor, or more likely I will just pay them off. I will say, well, you know what? This didn't work out. The guy paid for 3 years and he stopped paying. I'll pay off the passive investor balance. If they want to find a different note investment to partner on, we can do that, that kind of thing. Because the passive investor invests for passive income. They don't typically invest to get into foreclosure proceedings and, non-performing assets and 12 months worth of inconvenience and all that. So we do simply an assignment of mortgage between me and the passive investor, saying, hey, we're officially assigning this portion of the note with, to the passive investor for this period of time. And then there's a loan between me and the passive investor to formalize the payment process, and basically make me accountable to pay that person, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Ron?
Yes, that did. Yep.
Yep. Now, to your other question, tax implication, income interest, very simply, income interest. So same as if you invested, say, in a CD or something like that, and had income interest from that. So that's what this is. For that reason, these investments tend to be very popular with retirement accounts, self-directed IRAs, self-directed 401ks, for folks who move their traditional retirement funds into a real estate custodian. That's actually how my wife Emily started investing in notes. She had about 100,000 sitting in a IRA, and it's great because at that point it's a total tax shelter. You don't pay any interest income on it, and so it's very popular in this investment space using retirement funds.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, what I would say is, if after you guys look at the mortgage notes, and if you think that's something that's interesting enough to talk about further, like it's something you'd want to look at for your portfolio, whether it's today or in the future, I think it'd be worthwhile to set up some time to speak one-on-one. It's very difficult for me to put all the nuts and bolts of mortgage note investing in this presentation. We definitely touched on a lot, and I think we've gotten a good overview. But I'd love to be available for questions if you think it's a future portfolio mover, because then we can get into more of the nitty gritty and maybe look at some more specific examples and things like that. So yeah, definitely feel free to reach out, email or phone. And with that, we'll sign off. Looking forward to next week. I'll make sure to send out more event reminders, and we'll wrap up with our 10-year plan next week. Everybody have a great rest of the week and weekend.